All right, I think we've got enough people joined in so that we can get started. Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Focus for today's session is going to be things you probably didn't know you could do with Bullhorn, more specifically with Bullhorn Automation and Bullhorn Analytics. A lot of what we're going to talk about is going to be maybe new features that we've released throughout the year, so we really look forward to sharing our content with you. So a couple of housekeeping items. The session will be recorded and we're going to share it with you guys after. As this is a webinar, everyone will be on mute, but if you have any questions, we encourage you to ask as many as you can in the Q&A section. We'll aim to answer them throughout the call or towards the end of it. If we end up not being able to answer some of your questions, we'll make sure to follow up after the webinar is over. Quick introduction. My name is Eric Mati. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Strategic Manager for Automation and AI here at Bullhorn. I've been in the business for just about 4 years. And what I'll be showing you today is new features from Bullhorn Automation from 22 that you probably didn't know you could be leveraging for your business. I'm joined today by Chris. Chris, you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining today. So I'm Chris Little and I am the Sales and Strategy Specialist for Analytics at Bullhorn. Previously worked at Cube19 for 8 years prior to the acquisition. And yeah, just like Eric, looking forward to discussing things you potentially didn't know you could do with Bullhorn today.
All right, so here's what we're going to cover. We want to spend most of today's time into products, showing you different use cases that you can apply for your business. But before that, we're going to do a quick recap on the current state of the industry, and we're going to introduce connected recruiting as a strategy as well. Most of you today probably already know connected recruiting. We've been talking about it for a very long time. We've presented it quite a lot in our Engage sessions as well. But for anyone who hasn't heard about connected recruiting, I'm going to introduce this strategy very briefly, because it's very important for every recruitment agency to be thinking about this and implementing it as we go into the new year as well. So, current state of the market. We all know that we're in a talent short market. Candidates are dominating the priorities list for all recruiters. And even when we think about business development and winning new clients, that wasn't in the top 3's priority list for the first time in over a decade, right? The big focus now is acquiring new candidates, providing these candidates with a great experience, and having the right digital transformation strategy to help you achieve this. We recently ran a talent grid survey just to survey what candidates felt around their experience and how they interact with recruitment agencies. And candidates have a favorable opinion of recruiters. They want to be working with you. They actually prefer to have a human interaction when going through the application process, the job search process, and they value the recruiter's expertise and knowledge in helping them secure those opportunities. But when we look at the experience, that's where we really fall behind as an industry. Almost every second candidate falls off the process because they find it too long and too tedious to go through. Almost every second candidate blames poor communication as the leading reason why they've had a bad experience. So this is what we're really going to try and solve. And that's the main reason why we've introduced the connected recruiting strategy. So think of connected recruiting as a flywheel effect. If it's achieved properly, it can help you attract, engage, onboard, and nurture your talent by essentially providing them with a great experience throughout their entire life cycle. Now, connected recruiting is not a single piece of technology. That's very important. It is the combination of the right tech with the right marketing and recruitment best practices to essentially transform the way that your recruiters are working with your candidates. And everything we're going to show you today will be segmented in each of those key phases, and each use case will help you solve, to some extent, some of the challenges that you may be facing from an attract, engage, onboard, and nurture perspective. So let's start with attract. The focus around attract is for all these candidates that you're pulling from external sources. So that could be job boards, LinkedIn Recruiter, any lead gen activity that you might be doing, like webinars, social media events, landing pages on your website, whatever that needs to be, right? In a manual world, a big chunk of those candidates that end up in your database just go into a black hole. They're never to be spoken to again by the recruiter. So the focus here is how do we ensure that every candidate that hits your database is communicated with from day one, and there is a valuable action that has taken place with that person. So from an analytics perspective, Chris is now going to talk to us about how we can find new candidates that haven't been sent to a job or a sales contact. And then from an automation perspective, we can see how we can engage with every candidate that hits your database, but also include some calls to action there as well.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Yeah, so look, I've just been looking through the list of attendees. So thanks everyone for joining. It's great to see so many familiar names as well. So for existing clients, what we're going to be focusing on today is really a handful of actionable insights that are really being underutilized, that are going to have a big knock-on effect if utilized correctly and a big impact on your business. So for clients that are not using analytics, we are going to be demonstrating how turning data into action and delivering it to recruiters in real time at the desk level can affect positive change and improve the candidate experience. So actionable insights were designed to show every level of the business what is not happening and what actions can be taken today to be more successful tomorrow. Now, as Eric already alluded to, talent still desires human interaction, but they expect the hiring process to be streamlined and fast. So it's essential we connect with talent at the earliest opportunity. The actionable insight that Eric's going to highlight now of new candidates not sent to a job or contact, it's going to be visible on everybody's unique dashboard and deliver a working list of candidates that have been added to the database that now need to be sent to a contact or a job. So typically recruiters are targeted against a number of candidates they add to Bullhorn, and they spend a considerable amount of time sourcing these new candidates. But often the call to action can get missed. So by having this actionable insight available on everybody's unique dashboard, you can be sure that your recruiters are going to be focusing on the right candidates at the right time. And I'll pass you over to Eric, who's going to be able to show you how we can start to leverage automation in this process as well.
Thanks, Chris. So moving into the automation product. How are we going to engage with all these candidates that we've added in the database? Well, the first and obvious thing would be just having an automation that welcomes every candidate who is added, regardless of what source they came from, right? You can tailor your strategies depending on the source as well. But in this case, we don't want to just welcome them to the community. We want to include a call to action. So for John, the candidate, I'm welcoming him to the Acme community, but I want to ask him to complete his profile so that we can capture any information we might be missing from that person. Or the second call to action could be, hey, you know what? If you're looking at opportunities, why don't you check our career page? So potentially leading that candidate to even apply for a job as well. Now, as I'm taking John on that journey to complete his profile, he's being redirected on the website. And that's one of the first new features that I'm going to show you today, which we released earlier this year, and that's the chatbot. It's a new way of for you to interact with your candidates when they're on your website, and it's just essentially functioning in a very similar way to a survey. In this case, we want to ask John to confirm his contact information. So if the email address we currently have is still the preferred one, the same thing could be done for their phone number. And if there is any information that John needs to edit, they can just provide that up-to-date phone number straight on the chatbot. And the same way as you would with a survey, it can update the record itself back into Bullhorn. So your recruiters don't need to really do anything themselves. That information will just flow back and update the profile so they can work with up-to-date records themselves. Now, it doesn't need to handle contact details, right? We could do things like employment preferences. So if you work with multiple industries or multiple segments within an industry, you can ask that candidate to choose what the preferences are, and that can code them up internally so the recruiter knows which opportunities to be reaching out to that candidate for. Things like job title, or if you do permanent and contract roles, they can choose what kind of employment they're interested in to, again, send that candidate to the right recruiter within your business. And even when we think about lead generation, right? In most cases, if you have somebody sign up for a webinar or white papers or just a standard sign-up form, you wouldn't ask them for a full-on profile update. You'll get first, last name, email address, maybe what company they work for, but you don't get the CV. So this is an excellent next step for them, is as you're welcoming them to your community, ask them to provide you with a fresh copy of that CV, which they'll be able to do directly within the chatbot, and that can parse into the record itself and update the candidate. So instead of having a bunch of leads just sitting in your database doing nothing and no one speaks to them, you now have more qualified candidates who have gone through that initial screening process that your recruiters can reach out to and speak with. And that's just one of the many use cases where you can apply the chatbot, right? We're going to explore a couple of examples later on, but it's something to think about as an additional channel or method of engaging with your talent, especially when we start thinking about omni-channel communication being so important moving into next year as well. So moving on to the next one, we're going to talk about engage. Now, the focus around the engage phase of connected recruiting is around all the candidates who are already in your database. So these could be candidates that have been sitting there for months, years, haven't been spoken to in a very long time, and we essentially need to have a strategy to re-engage with them, get that up-to-date information, start pushing jobs their way. But it could also be for candidates who are actively in process, right? The ones who have applied for a job or getting closer to the interview stage, and they need to be supported and communicated with by the recruiter. And as we saw earlier, that's a big challenge in the industry, right? It's the frequency in communication between a candidate and a recruiter. So from an analytics perspective, what Chris is going to show us is how you can identify those candidates who are in the interview stage but haven't been submitted against any other opportunities, how you can leverage this as a business to increase the chance of that candidate being placed. And from an automation perspective, we're going to explore how you can engage with all these candidates in interview process consistently and ensuring that you're reducing the dropout rates for one, but also you provide them with a better experience as they're going through that stressful time in the application process, right? So Chris, let me just move over.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So like Eric mentioned, talent shortage has been probably the theme of 2022. So how do we solve the talent shortage? What customers are saying is they need to find more candidates. Now, sure, having a continuous sourcing strategy is essential, but there is a faster and a more direct impact that can be gained by increasing the chance of placing the candidates you're already working with. So increasing the number of placements without any additional cost. Now, that sounds pretty good to me. So I suppose over to the stat time. On average, only 1 in 4 candidates that interview with a single client are ever placed. So that means that 75%, so 3/4 of candidates that you get to the interview stage, you do not place. However, if you get the candidate in front of 1 additional customer, the chance of placing them increases to 40%, so 1 in 3. Present them to a 3rd customer, that now jumps to a 1 in 2 chance. Yet, in spite of this, 90% of candidates only ever interview with 1 single client. Now, if 1 client wants to interview 1 of your candidates, it's more than likely another client would as well. So, like Eric mentioned, let's dramatically improve the chance of placing candidates with the highlighted actionable insight here. Candidates with interview, not submitted to another job. Now, to put this in context, you can get a significant increase in return on effort on the candidate side. You do not need to make drastic changes here. If you took only 20% of the candidates who are only interviewing at 1 client and put them in front of 1 additional client, this would result in a 7% increase in placements, gross margin, gross profit, with no additional candidates, recruiters, or cost. If you've not already actioned this actionable insight and made it available to every user in your business, I highly advise you do. Back to you, Eric.
All right. So thanks, Chris. Moving on to the automation side of things. So if you already have automation, this one is going to be very familiar for you. For those of you who don't have automation, any of our customers that are using Bullhorn automation today, they have access to what we call blueprints. It's a library of essentially automations that we've already pre-built for you off the back of best practices in the industry. It's essentially designed to give you a significant head start very early on in your automation journey. One of these is tailored around communicating with candidates now that an interview has been scheduled and in the days leading up to that interview date. So the automation that you're seeing here is centered around the interview date itself, and we have some communication happening prior, such as confirming the interview, sending all the relevant details, a week before, sending in a check-in email to that candidate, and the day before, in this case, sending them a text message, just wishing them good luck. Now, if you're only utilizing Bullhorn automation today, then this will be just a text message that goes out of a generic phone number that is associated to your business. But if you add Bullhorn messaging in play, most of you probably already have Bullhorn messaging as well. This is where you can take it a step further. This is where you can provide each and every one of your recruiters with a dedicated phone number. So the same way as every one of those emails is sent on behalf of your recruiters and it provides a personal experience for the candidate, you can have those text messages sent from your recruiters' phone numbers as well. So from a candidate perspective, it's a seamless experience. They receive the emails from the recruiters, they receive the text messages from the recruiters, and they feel supported as they're going through that process. But as far as the recruiter is concerned, they're working on something else, right? They're speaking with other candidates during process, they're advising them and guiding them through the application, and automation is doing all these outreaches on that behalf to make sure that all the other candidates feel supported. The only time they need to get involved is if that candidate were to respond. You know what, I actually do need some help. The interview is tomorrow. Can you give me a quick call? That can be an internal notification that goes immediately into the Bullhorn messaging account of that recruiter, whether it's their desktop or it's the mobile app that they have on their phones. And they can just pick up the conversation themselves and truly guide and help that candidate where necessary. But for everything else, it will just keep running in the background. And the recruiter can also easily differentiate which communication was initiated by automation and which communication they handle themselves. So again, one of the many use cases for Bullhorn messaging and Bullhorn automation being able to play well together. But if you're not doing this today, then this is an excellent way for you to take it a step further with omni-channel communication as well, right? We have email from a business perspective, from a recruiter perspective. Now we have SMS as well. All right. Next up, we have onboard. The focus on the onboarding side of connected recruiting, that depends on what kind of business you are, right? And what you typically do in the onboarding phase for each candidate that ends up getting placed. But this is exactly what this is. It's what happens with the candidate from the moment you place them in the days leading up to the start date and the first days and weeks after that placement has started. Now, from a candidate experience point of view, this is where candidates typically notice the biggest dropout in engagement from the recruiter once the placement is made, because the recruiter would just move on to another project and just give them a call on the first day to make sure they've actually showed up for work, right? And this is a big no-no. We want to ensure that that communication is going on consistently with these candidates as they're leading up to that first day, because they might not be starting in a week, they might not be starting in a month, and there are a lot of things that can happen in between. So by keeping that communication going consistently, you're ensuring higher candidate service and a better experience for them, which can lead to better NPS feedback. We're going to talk about that in a few seconds. But it's also allowing you to react a lot quicker in case something were to happen with that candidate, and you can get ahead of it and be more proactive instead of being reactive to the whole situation. So from an analytics perspective, Chris is going to show us how we can identify all those pending starters that haven't been engaged with in the last 30 days. And then from an automation perspective, we're going to briefly touch on an automation tailored around onboarding and engaging candidates before and after the start date, but more specifically, how you can leverage NPS feedback and apply what we call survey branching, another new feature we released this year to introduce calls to action within the NPS feedback as well. So Chris, let me just move over to analytics.
Yeah, and Eric's 100% right there. We want to be engaging these new starters before they actually start their role. You know, we're in a highly competitive market, so it's vital to stay in contact with your pending starters. Candidates are going to be working out their notice period. They're going to be counter-offered. They'll be offered jobs by other agencies. So, because given the fact that they're going to be present, that they are on the market, I suppose the actionable insight that Eric's highlighting here is those pending starters with no calls in the last 30 days. Now, you can change the parameters on that and the time period, but it's important as it allows you to stay in touch and remind them why they took the opportunity in the first place. Eric's going to show you how automation will be working in the background, but it's vital to have that human touch point as it gives recruiters a chance to build that relationship out and make sure they're continuously to qualify what's actually going on. So back to you, Eric.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, so moving into the automation side of things. Surprise, surprise, this is another blueprint readily available for you. So if you're not using it already, I highly encourage you to go and check it out. But this automation is tailored around communicating with candidates that have now been placed. So we have the confirmation email that is sent once that placement has been confirmed within Bullhorn, and then all the communication that happens leading up to that start date. So the email check-ins, the text message check-ins that you could have there as well, very similar to the previous one I showed you with the interview. But now that we're past the start date, we can have check-ins after that as well. So how was your first day? How was your first week? And the month in, this is typically when we see the NPS feedback being sent to those candidates to ensure that we're capturing feedback from everyone that we place, right? So as far as best practices is concerned, those of you who are using automation are probably already applying this. But where we take it a step further is by applying what I mentioned earlier as survey branching. So as that candidate receives the NPS email asking them to score the level of service, depending on the answer that they give us, we can take them on different journeys. So if it's a neutral score like a 6 or a 7, or it's a low score like a 2, 3, or 4, we could have a call to action that is like, we apologize for the poor service. What can we do to help us improve? But if the score was a highly positive one, let's say a 9 or a 10, this is where you want to introduce the call to action within the same engagement rather than waiting and pushing a separate one. So if the feedback was indeed great, then let's ask that candidate to leave a testimonial and just ask for that quote that you can then position on your website, very similar to what you're seeing behind the survey itself. Ask them to leave a review. If you've partnered up with any online review partners, then you can just hyperlink your specific page for every candidate to go and leave your review there. It could be even designed to refer a friend, so they can provide you with some essential information about a person they're trying to introduce to you, like name, email address, phone number, what company they work for, and then you can take over from there and qualify them. But what we're doing here essentially is we're ensuring that we don't just end it at getting the feedback from that candidate. We're trying to extract additional value from that great experience we've provided them with during the attract phase of connected recruiting, during the engage phase, and now during the onboard phase as well. And that leads us into nurturing. So nurturing is where, in my opinion, you start really to maximize the value of all these relationships that your recruiters have built with these candidates. They've worked hard to engage with them throughout the journey. They've leveraged automation and analytics to identify the gaps in the process to help them improve on that. And they kept that communication going during the onboarding phase as well. Now, the nurturing element is where you continue that communication with everyone who is actively on assignment so that you have them ready to be engaged when the right time comes. In this case, to potentially redeploy them somewhere else, right? In the manual world, redeployment is a big challenge for most businesses. By the time you find that a candidate's contract is coming close to an end, if you don't have the right analytics tool, if you're not automating your engagements, you might miss out on a very good candidate that will go and work with your competitor because you didn't reach out on time. So what we're going to explore now from an analytics perspective is how you can use analytics to identify all the contract finishers that haven't had an extension, a submission, an interview, or another placement. And then from an automation perspective, you already know that there is a redeployment automation if you're using it, but I'm going to show you how you can enhance that redeployment automation and take it a step further as well. So Chris, moving into analytics.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, so look, for those of you that know me on this call, you know my thoughts when it comes to redeployment. In my eyes, temp contract redeployment is one of the biggest missed opportunities in the global staffing industry. Only 4% of finishers are redeployed into their next role by the same firm. So that means that 96% of your finishers are being redeployed by the competition. Now, that's a crazy and rather a scary stat as well. Now, the main reason for this is that only 15% of finishers are ever submitted to another role at the end of their assignment. Now, redeployment is so low because the fundamental actions required to redeploy do not happen the majority of the time. It requires far more effort to find a candidate you do not know than to redeploy a candidate you're already working with. Now, that's because you already have a relationship with them, they're compliant and payrolled, they may even trust you, and you have the references from their last role because that's your client. So this should really be low-hanging fruit. Around 1 in 3 finishers submitted are redeployed successfully. So keep redeployment at the top of mind with the following actionable insight. Finishers with no extension, submission, interview, or placement. So proactively identify candidates that are finishing assignments with no steps taken to get them redeployed. This is going to be crucial in protecting gross profit.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. Okay, so last automation that I'm going to run you through today. Very similar to the onboard and engage candidates as they're getting closer to the start date and in the first few days and weeks after that start date. We're now targeting all the candidates who are getting close to the end of their contract. So we're going to have some engagements that happen prior and some engagements that could happen after that. But the point here is that very early on, let's say a month or even 2 months, depending on the kind of contracts that you guys work with, you can initiate those redeployment efforts through automation without your consultants having to get involved. So that could be checking in on the candidate. Hey, I know your contract is expiring in a month, just wanted to see how things are going. As they're getting closer, it could be things like checking in on whether the candidate is aware of an extension happening to that contract, or if they're already thinking about next steps, and we can embed an opportunity for them to book some time with a recruiter and have a conversation around what they want to do next. It could be just sending the job recommendations to within Bullhorn automation to start sending similar jobs to the ones that candidate has been placed again previously, that they can go check out on your website and potentially redirect them to apply for those jobs straight away, right? And again, this is a blueprint. So if you're already using automation, chances are, and you're dealing in contractor, chances are that you already have this on. But this is where we can take it a step further. A big use case for the chatbot, and I think I saw this question in the Q&A. Yes, we do have a chatbot now available with Bullhorn automation that you can implement and connect to your website. But one of the popular use cases with a chatbot is embedding it in the signature for any automated engagement. And the example here is just, hey, do you need help outside of working hours? You can chat to us 24/7. And this is where you can build your own workflow and just provide some very basic assistance to any candidate that wants help and the recruiters are not there to assist them because it's outside of the working hours, right? Depending on what kind of business you are, this could be a candidate who has just started working with you. It's the first time engaging with your business and they need to submit their timesheets and they don't know how to do it. So you could include a very basic walkthrough as to how that candidate needs to approach submitting their timesheets. Or it could be an instance where if you're doing shift work, for example, that candidate is not able to make it to work and they need to cancel that shift. Just choosing that option could flag it internally to the recruiter. And once they step into the office, they already know which of those candidates won't be able to make the shift and they can get ahead of it. So think about how valuable of an insight that is for every recruiter that works on a shift-based desk. Or maybe that candidate has changed their personal information or their employment preference and they need to make a quick update. Your recruiters don't need to be involved in that conversation. It can happen outside of working hours and the candidate can just provide an up-to-date email address or employment preferences or phone number, whichever way they want, directly from the chatbot themselves. Or if we follow the example redeployment, maybe that candidate is getting close to the end of their contract and they want to see what opportunities are out there. So this is where the job recommendation tool within Bullhorn Automation can suggest very similar jobs to the one the candidate has currently worked, and that could redirect them straight to the career portal. They can check them out and potentially even apply for one. So again, one of a lot of examples that you can actually utilize the chatbot for, but it's an excellent way for you to have that additional call to action and that additional layer of support for these candidates, whether it's redeployment, so suggesting these jobs to every candidate that engages with the chatbot, or just providing that basic assistance outside of working hours in something that you can have available for everyone that engages with your business. Okay, and that sums it up. One last thing that I wanted to show you, which unfortunately didn't make it into the demo today, but I'm really excited about. And that's the calendar integration tool that we're releasing and it's coming soon with Bullhorn Automation. So the reason why this is so cool is because it will integrate with your recruiters' calendars and it will enable you to allow scheduling of available slots directly with the recruiter. So from a candidate perspective, you can embed, and the client perspective, you can embed those available slots as part of your automated notifications. You can improve the engagement by sending out reminders as they're getting closer to that specific date and time for the meeting. And you can allow them to self-serve the same way as the candidate was able to leverage the chatbot to find job suggestions or get a walkthrough to how to submit their timesheets. If they decide to book some time with a recruiter, they'll be able to book that and self-serve directly throughout the chatbot. And as far as the candidate experience is concerned, it will be available on the mobile experience. It's going to be seamless for them regardless of what device they use, but it will also be available for them on a desktop point of view as well. And depending on who owns that record, that's where the appointment will go through within Bullhorn. So hopefully this gave you a few ideas of things that you could be doing with automation and analytics. If you have both products, that is, of course, a few use cases that you can start implementing today. If you have one, but not both of these products, then and you want to learn more, just reach out to your account manager. They'll be more than happy to have the conversation with you and even run you through a tailored demo if necessary. And if you want to learn more around connected recruiting, I'm just going to leave this as we go through the Q&A. Scan the QR code. This will redirect you to the connected recruiting page. There's a lot of useful insight around this strategy. It's something that I really encourage you to check out. And I think it's going to be significantly valuable for you in the upcoming 23. All right, let's move into Q&A. I think we have like a